This is my hybrid table saw. A hybrid table saw is essentially a cross between what's traditionally known as a contractor saw and a cabinet maker saw, but I don't have a cabinet maker saw to show you. Now, the term contractor saw is kind of obsolete because contractors nowadays almost always use job site saws like this one, because these are so much easier to move than one of these. But before these saws came into existence in about the 1980s, one of these was still a lot easier to move than a cabinet maker saw, because on one of these you can take the motor off and you can also detach it from the base, and then it's actually fairly luggable by two people. So this contractor saw isn't exactly the way they come stock. I've added a table extension here. I closed it off on the bottom and I closed it off here so I have better dust collection. And I also added this here, which dampens some of the vibrations. So it's kind of hard to see inside the saw right now, but the mechanism for the saw is essentially attached to the bottom of the cast iron table, which isn't ideal. On a cabinet maker saw, the mechanism would be attached to the base and then the table just sits on top. But this is a hybrid table saw, and it's actually built more like a contractor saw, even though it looks more like a cabinet maker saw. So this one has an enclosed housing. There's a lid that goes on here, and the mechanism is almost identical to that of a contractor saw in that you have the trunnions attached to the bottom of the table. They're tied together with this bar here, and the motor hangs off the bottom of the mechanism, whereas if it was a contractor saw, the motor would hang out the back here and this would be open. So the big advantage of this over a contractor saw is that it's much easier to contain the dust. You don't have the motor sticking out the back, and beyond that it operates very much the same. Disadvantage over a contractor saw is that this is much harder to move because you can't take the motor off very easily and you can't take the base apart. But that's okay, because these saws are meant for hobbyists. They're meant to go into a hobby workshop and you really don't move them, much like you wouldn't with a cabinet maker saw. Now, contractor saws have cast iron tops and induction motors, which means they run quiet and they're fairly precise. But given the much better portability of a job site saw, even though they don't work as well, the increased portability of a contractor saw compared to a cabinet maker saw just doesn't make sense anymore. And so you don't really see many of these made anymore. And for a hobbyist who just wants an inexpensive saw to use in the workshop, it makes much more sense to have a cabinet like this with a motor inside. This doesn't cost any more to make than one of these. And essentially, this serves the purpose of being a hobbyist cabinet maker saw. And so these saws typically come with motors that are 1.5 or 1 3/4 horsepower, which is the biggest that you can still plug into a regular 120 volt outlet, whereas cabinet maker saws come with typically 3 horsepower motors and require a 240 volt circuit. Now, having the whole mechanism hang off the bottom of the table is not ideal compared to a cabinet maker saw, because for one thing, it causes the table to sag down just a little bit, whereas on a cabinet maker saw with the mechanism on the cabinet, there's no load on the top. This contractor saw is actually a little bit better in this regard, because with a motor at the back, it actually applies leverage and pushes the middle of the table up a little bit, and having the table bow up is actually much less of a problem than having it bow down. This one bows down by about 0.5 millimeter. I've been using my old contractor saw partially because I wasn't sure where I wanted to put it, and I have a mobile base on that one, but I'm pretty sure I want it there now, so I'll move it in place before I put it together. So except for the guard, which is kind of useless, this is now pretty much everything that came with the saw. And now adding my homemade table extensions. I have my router lift right here, plus an extra leg to support this table extension. And I have my little mini dust collector hooked up here. And right now this saw is actually, I've put it at an angle because I needed a lot of room this way. And then later for cove cuts this way because I was making a whole stack of baseboards since then. And that will be next week's video. Because we'll be traveling this week, so I don't have as much time to make a really involved video. So that's all for this week, and here's a sneak preview of my next video, which should be ready in a week.